So to no one's surprise, this Joe Rogan Tucker Carlson conversation started off with a little bit of controversy, a little bit of conspiracy, and even some strange spiritual crossover between aliens and the supernatural world. So I'm glad you're with me. Let's get into it.
Okay, so the template that you're using to understand this is like science fiction, right? These are an advanced race of beings from somewhere else. But the template that every other society before us has used is a spiritual one. Mm-hmm. There is a whole world that we can't see that acts on people, a supernatural world that's acting on us all the time for good and bad. Every society has thought this before ours. In fact, every society in all recorded history has thought that until, I'll be specific, August 1945, when we dropped the atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And all of a sudden, the West is just officially secular. We're God. There is no God but us. And that's the world that we have grown up in. But that's an anomaly. Like, no one else has ever thought that. There's never been a society that thought that. Every other society has assumed, and they've had all kinds of different explanations, and the details differ, but the core idea does not differ, never has differed from caves until now, that we're being acted on by spiritual forces at all times. And so to someone born before or living before 1945, I think it would have been much more obvious that this is the thing that every society has written about. And in fact, that battle, that unseen battle around us, that spiritual battle, has like been the basis of every society, of every religion, not just Christianity. So like it just, once you discard your very, very recent assumptions, relatively speaking, about how the world works, you're like, well, that kind of seems like the obvious explanation, right?
It's not that obvious to me.
So one of the things that Tucker is pointing out here is sort of like a chronological snobbery. This is, we look at the world through a modern lens, and we think that we're so advanced. We have technology. That's good. We do science well, and that's good. But the idea that ancient people were ignorant and didn't have any of this figured out is kind of arrogant. It's an arrogant way of looking at the world. It's chronological snobbery. It sort of disregards the fact that, just billions of people all throughout human history have always assumed that the world is not just material. The world is more than stuff. And one of the things that I could point you to is actually the episodes that we've done on simulation theory, where we explore biblical cosmology, we explore kind of the medieval cosmology that really tried to work out just how layered the world is, just all the stuff that's going on in the world, but not assuming that everything in the world is just what we can see and taste and touch and measure with a instrument, that there is more to this world. And I really appreciate Tucker's tone here as far as just like, why not just say what you believe? I think sometimes we parse our words a little bit too much. We understand that not everybody agrees with us, and we think that saying that the world is spiritual, that there's supernatural elements to the world, that those forces interact with us. This is sort of the, life verse for this podcast, because I bring it up almost every time, but it's Ephesians, 6:12. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against rulers and against powers and against world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces. And this is something that Tucker and Joe are going to get to in this podcast is it the government? Is it aliens? Are aliens spiritual beings? But really it's both. There are powers and principalities that are active in this world. Some of that manifests itself within government structures. Some of that is sort of just lives in this spiritual world and sort of influences individuals. And I just appreciate that Tucker is not afraid to just come out and say what he thinks, because it's one thing for you and I to have this conversation. It's one thing to have this conversation sort of over the coffee table at your local coffee shop. But when Tucker says it on Joe Rogan, then the people who think the same way feel a little extra permission to just say, hey, this is what I think. I think there's more going on than what we can see at face value. I think there's a spiritual battle going on that influences what we see in the material world. And the two are not sort of as separate as we might want to believe, to the point where some people have just disregarded the spiritual world and said it doesn't exist. It's just the natural world. That's all that it is. I can't be confident in anything else because I can't see it or taste it or touch it. Okay, fine. So I don't know what you do with love and other things like that. But what I hope will happen is because this conversation is happening with Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson, it will give just normal everyday people a sense that, hey, you can just say this stuff. You can just talk. You can just say what you believe. And that is powerful. Those dialogues, those conversations, those interactions, whether it's you and me through the medium of the internet, or coworkers at work, or fellow students at school, or again, just somebody over the coffee shop, over the coffee table at the coffee shop, having these conversations that have really been a part of knitting together human society from the beginning. And so just, again, appreciate the tone here from Tucker Carlson on a platform like Joe Rogan, just coming out and saying, hey, there's spiritual forces that are interacting with world forces. What we see often is the worldly effect of a more foundational spiritual battle that has always existed. Now, Tucker talks about the atomic bomb being the point at which sort of humanity, took the role of God.
In fact, every society in all recorded history has thought that until, I'll be specific, August 1945, when we dropped the atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and all of a sudden the West is just officially secular. We're God. There is no God but us.
Humanity became God. And maybe that's a technological milestone to look at, that, like, technologically speaking, like, wow, but I think there was sort of like a philosophical atomic bomb that was dropped long before that happened in the material world, in the world of technology and advancement for human society. I mean, Nietzsche, this is the parable of the madman from The Gay Science, 1982. I knew I was going to do that. 1882, 1887. So long before this, he's long before the atomic bomb, Nietzsche is working out something that he sort of philosophically gave words to, but I actually think is even far more ancient than the atomic bomb, than Nietzsche working it out philosophically. I think it actually goes back to the beginning of time. You could look at Genesis. So this is Nietzsche writing 1887, 1882, working this all out philosophically long before the atomic bomb. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, I seek God, I seek God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Has he gotten lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone away on a voyage, immigrated? Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. Whether is God, he cried. I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained the earth from its sun? Whether is it moving now? Whether are we moving now away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down left? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Essentially, there is no map of reality anymore. Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing yet of the divine decomposition? Gods too decompose, and God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe away this blood off of us? What water is there for us to cleanse ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatest of these deeds too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? Tucker and Joe Rogan will talk about these things through this conversation. They'll talk about the lack of a map of reality and the fact that we have had to become basically gods. We have had to replace God to be worthy of this deed that we've done. There's never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us for the sake of this deed will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto. Against that chronological snobbery. Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw down his lantern to the ground, and it broke to pieces and went out. There's no light. "I've come too early," he said. "My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. Light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant to them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves." It has been related further that on the same day, the madman forced his way into several churches and struck up his requiem aeternam Deo, eternal rest grant them, O Lord. He let out and called to account. He is said always to have replied nothing but, "What, after all, are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God?" And we must remember GK Chesterton, who said God, when he appears to have died, maybe has died 1,000 times, but the Christian God, he knows the way out of the grave. So maybe Nietzsche and Chesterton should have got together and had this conversation, because he's 100% right. I mean, there's so much truth in this. And in some ways, I almost feel that Nietzsche is being sarcastic sometimes. Though I think in many ways he very much believes this and became very nihilistic because he believed this. He had no hope of the resurrection of God. So again, I think this conversation pulls us back into ancient time. You could think of the death and resurrection of Christ. You could even go before that, the Tower of Babel, as humanity tries to supersede God, build up to God. You can think of Adam and Eve in the garden, wanting to become like God by doing by living in disobedience to God or disharmony to God. The irony of the transhumanist sort of movement that we see in modernity is one, that it's very ancient, but also that the deception of the devil was a temptation to take for yourself something and become like God, to humanity that was already made in God's image. So we've wrestled with this since the beginning, and I think it is amazing that Tucker and Joe are bringing it up in today. I mean, they're bringing it up into the conversation today, or maybe we're rehashing this ancient conversation that for so long, because of our modern sort of approach, has kind of fallen off the table, and we don't talk about it, or we talk about it in side conversations, but it hasn't emerged Tucker is talking about how this belief in this cosmic battle has been the foundation for human civilization. We've ordered our societies because of an awareness of this, but not our modern society. Our modern society said, no, that doesn't exist. And now we've tried to navigate our way through life based on our own ability. And we've attempted to amplify humanity to the place of divinity. Thank you, Francis Schaeffer there.
And you probably won't achieve your goal, but you should try. And on the AI question, everyone I've ever talked to, but I'm hardly an expert. I don't own a computer, okay? But everybody I've ever talked to, and there's many people, are like, yeah, it's, could get away from us. And enslave us? Well, let's say no to slavery. How's that? Is that a tough one? Not for me.
Yeah.
I mean, and maybe a good use of nuclear weapons would be to hit the data centers. No, I'm serious. Like, why is that crazy?
It's not. It's not if you think that human beings are the end of this evolutionary chain.
Well, what else is? Some supercomputer in a data center outside Dulles Airport? No. I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I don't actually think that individuals, I don't think I'm that important. My life is that important. I don't. I will die. I know that. And I try to keep that in mind every day.
But you're important to everybody that cares about you. You're important to the people
But
around you.
if we don't think people are important, then what do we think is important? I guess that's what I'm saying.
Not necessarily that we don't think people are important, but if evolution is real, and if there is this constant, I don't know, but it's visible. Like you can measure it in certain animals.
You can measure adaptation.
Yeah.
But there's no evidence that in fact, I think we've kind of given up on the idea of evolution. The theory of evolution as articulated by Darwin is like kind of not true. Right?
In what sense?
Well, in the most basic sense, the idea that, all life emerged from a single cell organism and over time, and there would be a fossil record of that, and there's not. And
there's not a fossil record of transitionary species, like species that are adapting to its environment.
There's
and they
tons
develop...
of record of adaptation, and you see it in your own life. I mean, I have a lot of dogs. I see adaptation in dogs, through the litter to litter. But no, there's no evidence at all zero, that people evolve seamlessly from a single cell amoeba. No, there's not. There's no chain in the fossil record of that at all. And that's why you don't actually hear people. You hear them make reference to evolution because the theory of adaptation is obviously true. But Darwin's theories. Totally, that's why it's still a theory almost 200 years later. No, we have not found that at all. And I can't even guess. I mean, I have my own theories on it, but they're not proven.
What are your theories?
God created people, distinctly, and animals. I mean, I think what every person on Earth thought until the mid-19th century, actually.
Right, but
it's not a new idea.
They didn't have computers. They didn't have a general understanding that we have today of the process.
Do you think we understand more now?
Yes.
Really?
You don't think that we understand more today?
We understand way less.
Okay. Good questions by Tucker. That's where we're gonna wrap it up. Because this, again, I just really appreciate Tucker sort of just very cavalierly, like challenging what the assumed position, sort of in culture that you can't challenge Darwin, you can't say that, you can't say evolution doesn't exist. But again, these are the conversations that normal people have, and it's refreshing to hear it on a platform like Joe Rogan, between Joe and Tucker having this conversation. Now, the point that I kind of want to bring up is actually that evolution is a very convenient theory if you want to control people. If you want to keep people in line, if you want to be able to treat people like beasts, then what's more convenient than convincing them that they practically are beasts, that we evolved from, animals to humanity, okay? Not that you're created in the image of God, not that you're created with free will to engage in worship of God, and that you can be, free, and that you can have not even just a sense of joy or enjoyment or peace or something like that, but just that, that is our purpose is harmony with our Creator. Get away from all that. You're a beast. Why? Because I need to control you and treat you like a beast. And that is a part of a cosmic battle that does go on in the philosophical realm, in the mind. Again, going back to Nietzsche. Now, is it just an intellectual thing? Is it just the mind? No. This whole thing involves the mind, the spirit, the body of who we are as people, and the fact that the enemies of God despise the creation of God. They want to pervert it and distort it. This is what Paul writes in 2 Corinthians, for we walk in the flesh. We do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing that raises itself up against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. That is the conflict that we're in. It is, and there's a lot of hope here, because in the material world, it seems like we are up against some pretty strong forces, institutions, whatever it might be. And there's a deception that's going on that makes it really hard to sort of navigate the world going forward. Now, I do think we do have a roadmap. We do have a map of reality. It's Scripture, and with that, and in Scripture, we're told that the Spirit of God will lead us into truth. That something like prayer becomes very powerful up against these seemingly very powerful institutions. Prayer, dialogue, like what Joe and Tucker are doing, what you and I are doing, that these conversations, it may seem like no big thing, but disco overthrew communism. As communism tried to get into Italy and other places, it was disco, it was music. So God uses the foolish things of this world to confound the wise, right? It's always something like that. It's the prayers of your auntie, as she gets up early in the morning and prays for you, that you don't ever see in the material world, but they have an effect. So the weapons of our warfare are not like the flesh. We don't war like that. What do? We pray. We come together. We engage in communion. We give our lives for each other. Those are the things that are far more powerful than what seems to be a very powerful and very dark and forces that seem very much in control. So I hope that is an encouragement for you. And there's more to this conversation that we will have to unpack in maybe later episodes, but I'd love to get your feedback in the comments section. If you know anybody that would benefit from this conversation, share it with a friend. It seems like this particular episode, even though we've only looked at a little bit of Joe and Tucker's conversation, touches on a lot of the work that we've done in this podcast. So I can think of multiple other episodes that you, if you haven't watched, would sort of come into this conversation, and I'll leave the playlist below. So I'll catch you in the next one.